Hello everyone, welcome to What If Deku Has the Ability of Blacklight Virus Prototype Part 10. Before we start, please go support DummyWearingAHoodie for writing that awesome fanfic. Now let's begin. Chapter 32. Chaos, Revenge, and Abduction. Chaos ensues within the forest as Izuku sped past the trees, his body actively secreting pressurized blood that increased his overall speed. Blue fire and pink smoke spreading across the trees as distant sounds of screams and fighting can be heard echoing throughout the camp. How did this come to this? It was all peaceful, but how could the scales shift this quickly? Izuku shook off those thoughts as he quickened his pace. His destination was Kota's secret base to make sure that the boy was safe. The boy was nowhere to be seen as soon as both classes finished their dinner. Plus, he was the only one who knew about the boy's secret base. Maybe Ragdoll as well, but she had gone missing as soon as the fire started. So it's up to him to ensure that Kota returns safely. As he neared the base, Izuku could hear Kota's panicked breaths due to his enhanced hearing. It's a good thing that the boy was where he thought she would be, but it worried him as he heard a different voice with the little boy. A gruff voice that sounded manic. Using all his strength on his legs, he tackled Kota to the ground. It's a good thing he did. If he was even a second late, the boy would have been crushed by a large fist that created a crater upon impact. The figure was shocked at the green-haired boy's sudden appearance, but that immediately changed to a smirk when he recognized who had stepped in. Well, if it isn't Blackwatch. It looks like it's my lucky day I get to kill a hero, the man said menacingly. The green-haired boy immediately recognized the person standing in front of him. Goto Masuji, also known as Muscular. A villain responsible for countless deaths, including the water hose duo and unfortunately his own father. He remembered his mother's eyes when the news of the water hose's death were broadcasted, and then showed the face of the killer. He saw her face morph into anger when she saw the man's face and whispered, "Murderer," as she looked over at his father's picture frame. He put two and two together, and concluded that the man responsible for the water hose's death is also his father's murderer. Another reason he wanted to become a hero was to bring the man to justice. But looking at the man's sadistic face right now and the lack of remorse in his eyes, the young hero concluded that justice was not an option. Izuku ignored the man's sadistic expression and glanced towards Kota, who was visibly shaking in fear and was tearing up. "It's gonna be alright, Kota," he said to the boy, looking back at the villain in front of him. "I'm going to save you, no matter what." This caused a scoff from Muscular. "No matter what, you'll save him? That's cute," the man said mockingly as he clutched the cloak he was wearing. "Excellent as expected, the true essence of a hero ready to jump in at a time of need. Anytime, anywhere." The man smirked. "Izuku Midoriya, aka Blackwatch. I had just been ordered to start off by killing your sorry ass." Izuku gritted his teeth as he began summoning his quirk around his hands. At the same time the man did as well, as muscle tissues escaped the man's skin and surrounded his arm. Muscular then threw off his cloak and crouched down. "Right after I take my precious time torturing you, that is, let me see you bleed." The villain launched towards the two with speed almost rivaling All Might. Barely blocking the punch sent towards him, Izuku was sent to the mountain's side. Landing in a crater, if it weren't for his quirk healing and absorbing the impact of the punch, he would have been in pain right now. "Ah, whoops." Gritting his teeth, he looked up at the man. Muscular had his fist clenched with muscle fibers of his quirk surrounding his arms. "I almost forgot. If you know, then tell me." The man looked over at Izuku with a sadistic grin on his face. "By any chance, do you know where the Bakugo kid is? After all, first and foremost, I've got a job." "Katsuki?" he thought as the man sent a large punch towards him. "To finish." "You can say I don't can, huh?" His words were cut off when he felt his momentum recoiling back at him, pushing him off a good distance. If it weren't for his situational awareness, Muscular would have fallen down the cliff. Looking over at the young hero, he saw a spiked shield on the boy's arms as Izuku jumped out of the crater. Muscular scoffed in amusement. He grinned at the boy and was about to attack him again when he felt a rock hit him in the head. He turned to the direction where the rock came from and saw Kota's eyes filled with fear and tears. "Water hose my mom and dad, did you torment them like that before you killed them too?" the boy asked shakingly. Muscular stared at the boy for a few seconds before his face turned to recognition. What's this? Seriously? You're those heroes, kid? This must be fate. The man laughed. Water hose, those were the two that gave me this artificial left eye. He was about to continue talking when Kota cut him off. It's all your fault, it's because of people like you that things always turn out like this. The boy yelled at him. The man could only look at him with a scoff. Little snot-nosed brats like you are always looking to pass the blame. That's no good. I'm not even holding a grudge about my lost eye. I just simply wanted to kill Dot. The man smirked. And those two just happened to be dumb enough to try and stop me. The ones at fault are those who try to act even if they are incapable of doing anything effective, he said as his muscle fibers began to expand. That pretty much sums up you pathetic mom and dad, the man yelled as he saw a glimpse of a blur from behind him. That's how it goes, he smirked. Turning to the side, he saw Izuku with his muscle mass on. Isn't that right, Blackwatch, the fault is yours, he said as the boy's hand was trapped between the man's fibers. Muscular scoffed at the boy's pathetic way of action. He was about to mock him when the hand stuck in his muscle fibers began shifting into hammer fist. It's not a matter of what you can do or can't do. Risking our lives and walking the walk is our job. The hand expanded until it tore out of the man's muscles in a very painful way, judging by the man's yell of pain. The man's cry of pain was short-lived when the very same hand punched him square in the face, breaking his nose in the process, and sending him flying to the side of the mountain. The impact of the man landing caused an explosion of dust and debris as Izuku grabbed Kota and jumped away from the falling rocks. After making sure Kota was alright, he looked back at the man, who began escaping the crater. The villain shook the cobwebs of the punch and wiped the blood escaping his broken nose. The sight of his own blood made the man's grin grow wider, something that made Izuku glare. What a psychopath. Kota, he called out to the young boy, who flinched and looked at him. Get out of here, I'll handle this. What? No he'll kill you like mom and dad, the boy cried as he clutched on Izuku's sleeve. He then flinched when Izuku took the boy's cap from the ground and placed it over Kota's head. Don't worry, I'll be fine. I'll avenge your parents. I'll avenge our parents. Izuku could still see the uncertainty in the boy's eyes. He gave Kota a reassuring smile. I promise. Kota saw this and nodded, albeit reluctantly. Izuku watched as the boy ran away from the secret base. His face turned serious and looked back at the man, just in time to block a punch from the man. He snarled at the man's manic grin. Concentrating on his palms, he used Katsuki's quirk and smacked the grin out of the villain's face as he kicked Muscular in the chest with a muscle mass-covered feet. The man staggered as Izuku summoned his claws and swiped the man's left arm. The muscle fibers weren't enough to protect the man's arm from being cut off. He was about to go for the man's face, but the man used his remaining arm to send a punch to Izuku's face. With the help of shock nullification, Izuku just took the punch and sent a hammer fist-covered punch to the man's already bloodied face. The man was sent tumbling towards the debris. Izuku expected the man to just give up since the villain is clearly at his limit. To his surprise, Muscular shakily stood up while the manic expression was still etched on his bloodied face. Yes, that's it, Blackwatch, fight me till one of us dies, Muscular yelled out as he charged forward, his muscle fibers pulsing as it wrapped around his torso and arms. As Muscular charged forward, Izuku was motionless and deep in thought. For a person to be so ruthless and psychopathic, not even regretting that he killed someone in front of the children of the people he killed, he couldn't help but grit his teeth as his green eyes began turning red. Fight till one of us dies? Gladly, Izuku whispered as his hammer fist began morphing. Come on and die, Muscular yelled, swinging his muscle-enlarged fist at the boy, only for him to hit nothing but air. Before he could see where Izuku was, he felt a kick sent to his back, with force so strong it almost snapped his spine. For the nth time tonight, the villain was sent crashing to the side of the mountain. He crashed down his knees and was about to stand up when he saw something move from the corner of his remaining eye. He turned only to regret it as a spiked ball impacted on his chest, crushing his ribcage. A flail? He coughed out blood as he stared at Izuku, whose left arm appeared as a black and red chain connecting to the spiked ball. The young hero's eyes were glowing a raging red. "Gurai, is that all you've GGK?" The man's taunts were cut off when the spikes elongated, piercing through his body. Little by little he could feel his chest burning up as the spikes of the flail began to glow red. His cries of pain echoed through the mountain top, but Izuku didn't care. The spikes of his flail continued to elongate until it pierced out of the man's torso. As soon as the spikes were out, Izuku said, "Go to hell." That being said, Muscular's body was engulfed in flames. Izuku watched the man's cries turn guttural before it seized into nothing but the sound of meat sizzling. "Say hi to Overhaul for me, you son of a hitch," and with that Izuku retracted the arm towards him and absorbed the remains of the villain. As soon as the man's body was fully consumed, a wave of memories entered his mind, and Izuku had to stop himself from throwing up at the ruthless and sadistic things that the man had done to his victims, and also saw how he had tortured all of his victims before killing them. Even his dad. Seeing how his dad had suffered at the hands of the villain, Izuku teared up and was glad that he was able to avenge his dad and Koda's parents. "Oh, are you okay?" Izuku turned to the voice and saw Koda cautiously walking towards him and looking around. Izuku could see the worry in the boy's eyes. He gave the boy a reassuring smile. "Yeah, I'm fine." He saw the boy looking down and was tearing up. Why would you go this far?" Izuku saw the boy glancing towards the severed hand of the villain and understood what the boy was talking about. So he saw. "I'm sorry that you had to see that, but I had to. If I kept him alive, he would just hurt more people," he said, walking close to the little boy. "I know I'm a hero and I shouldn't have killed him, but understand this, Koda, not everyone deserves redemption. Especially those who enjoy tormenting others." He could see that the boy was still unsure. Izuku placed his hand on the boy's hand. "Let's not think of that for now. We have to get back to the base and we need your help." Koda was confused by that, and Izuku smiled at him. "Your quirk. We need your help to put out the fire with your quirk. Like how your parents do." Koda's teary eyes widened before he nodded. Izuku nodded back and carried Koda on his back. He jumped off the secret base and began jumping from treetop to another. His eyes focused as he looked around for his classmates. It was hard because of the trees' foliage covering the forest. He shook his head as he focused on returning Koda to the base as soon as possible. And he needs to relay a message to the other pros. For now he can only wish his classmates good luck as he nears the base. As soon as Izuku reached the base, he dropped Koda off to Aizawa and told the man that the villains are after Katsuki. As he was about to leave, Aizawa stopped him for a second and told him to relay a message to Mandalay. The message? "Members of Class 1A and Class 1B, I hereby authorize all of you for combat." Every student perked up at the message. They were about to engage in combat when another message popped up. "We've identified one of the villain's objectives. The student is named Katsuki Bakugo. As much as possible, avoid combat and refrain from wandering alone. It is a direct order from your class president." That was what Izuku told Mandalay 10 minutes ago. Right now, Izuku is sprinting around in search of Mei. She had also participated in the test of courage that both classes had partaken in, and she was with Ochako, Melissa, and Tsuyu when the fire had started. His sprint became faster when he used his sonar senses and found where the girls were. He gritted his teeth when he saw that the 4 girls were not alone. As he reached their location, Izuku kicked the other person who was with the girls. The kick sent the person tumbling to the trees with a loud thud. Izuku looked over at the girls and widened his head to see that some of their clothing was ripped, exposing some skin. He saw the terrified expression on Mei, who had her hands over her exposed chest. Izuku took off his hoodie jacket and gave it to the support student. "You bastard, as soon as I was having fun and close enough to turn them into my personal hitches, you had to screw it all up." Izuku turned to the person he had just kicked to the trees and his eyes turned from shock to rage in a second. "Minoru Minetta," Izuku said with venom laced in his tone. The short boy smirked. "You're damn right it's me." The same boy that Izuku had thrashed in the sports festival. So he's part of the villains now? Izuku thought as he glared daggers at the grape-haired boy. "Give me one reason not to tear you to shreds right now." Izuku growled out as his claws began to take shape. The other boy didn't even look fazed as he plucked an orb from his head. "Oh please, you don't scare me, and what had happened months ago was just a fluke. You can't beat me," he said as he chucked a ball towards Izuku, who didn't even move to avoid it. As the orb landed on Izuku's chest, Minetta smirked. Boom! That's when Izuku noticed a red light blinking on the orb. As soon as Minetta said boom, the ball exploded. The explosion caused an explosion of dust and smoke to engulf Izuku's spot. Minetta was cackling at his piece of work. With the help of an expert support item manufacturer, he was able to incorporate built-in bombs in the balls on his head that exploded upon impact. He knew it was only a fluke that Izuku had defeated him in the sports festival. Now that he didn't let the boy summon his abominations, he was free to get his hands over some hitches. Just the thought of himself getting his hands on those bouncy. His thoughts were interrupted when the dust cloud cleared with Izuku standing there like nothing happened. "Guys, go back to the base. I'll take care of this," Izuku said to the girls. The girls were about to protest, but when they saw Izuku's blank expression, they didn't say anything and just took off. All while wishing Izuku good luck. Minetta was confused at first and glared at Izuku for making the girls leave, but shrugged it off when he threw another orb onto Izuku. He'll just run after them. But to his surprise and shock, Izuku wasn't harmed. Just his t-shirt getting torn due to the explosions, but that as well shocked him as Izuku's shirt was returning back to its normal state. The shorter boy began to panic as he frantically threw a barrage of orbs at Izuku, who just started walking calmly towards the little villain. As he took another step, Minetta would take one backwards. Desperate and terrified at Izuku's blank expression, he threw another orb and yelled out, "Get away from me!" Izuku caught the ball in his hand, threw it back to the villain's torso and exploded. This caused the villain to get launched to a nearby tree. Minetta tried to stand up only for him to be grabbed by the neck and lifted from the ground. The young villain tried scratching Izuku's arms, but Izuku's hold tightened. Before Minetta could talk, Izuku, with a bit of black light on his hand, jabbed the boy's necks. The poke was strong enough to puncture through the skin of the boy's throat. As soon as he did that, Izuku let go of Minetta's neck and let the boy drop to the ground. He looked over at the boy who was clutching his bleeding neck and just turned away. As he began walking away, Minetta spoke up. Is that all you see can do, hero?" Pathetic, he was cut off when he choked. His neck began to throb uncontrollably as the searing pain of the jab grew tenfold. What did you do to me?" the boy yelled out, but to no luck as Izuku just continued walking away. "Get back, GH!" Those were Minetta's last words as a black and red tendrils escaped his neck and latched onto the trees before it retracted back with great speed and strength that it crushed him, killing him in the process. As soon as he finished dealing with his former classmate, Izuku was met with a rampaging dark shadow engulfing Tokoemi. Shoji told him that dark shadow became uncontrollable when a villain ambushed them. Izuku simply used Todoroki's quirk, his fire side to be precise, to weaken the sentient quirk. It took him a few seconds before Dark Shadow returned back into Tokoemi. It didn't take long for them to meet Katsuki and Shoto, the latter carrying an unconscious Koziite Subiraba. They were dealing with a villain that Izuku recognized as a part of the escapees of Tartarus that were in the death row, Moonfish, a villain that almost looked like a Cenobite from Hellraiser. A horror movie from the pre-quirk era that Izuku used to watch back as Alex back in his high school days. With team effort, Izuku and the others defeated the villain. As they tried walking back to the base, Izuku looked back at his classmates, only to find that Tokoemi and Bakugo were nowhere to be seen. Looking around, they saw a man wearing a white mask with weird black geometric designs holding 2 blue marbles in between his fingers. They began a chase of cat and mouse. The only difference is that the cats were sending large-scale icebergs at the mouse, who was impressively making use of the air pressure caused by the icebergs to make himself float. Desperately, Izuku combined earth flow with black light and created a juggernaut. He then ordered said creature to throw him, Shoji, and Shoto in Compress, the villain, direction before telling it to take Subiraba back to the base. Launching to the sky, they tackled Compress to the ground. However, they were forced to dodge when a wave of blue fire was sent in their direction. As they dodged to the side, the masked villain turned himself as a marble to dodge the attack before getting out of the marble. To think they came after me? What marvelous thoughts take flight, Compress said, rubbing his armed shoulder as he walked away from the crater. And Bakugo? A villain with black hair and the owner of the blue fire. Well, of course. Compress began searching his pockets, seemingly finding nothing. That's when Shoji showed his hand that held 2 blue marbles. They expected the villains to panic, but they were confused when the only thing they got was claps from Compress. Their confusion was short-lived when the marbles turned into ice. The villain taunted them, opting for Shoto and Izuku to charge forward. They were halted when black mist suddenly appeared from behind the villains. The students recognized the mist from the USJ incident, and know what was the purpose of said mist. One by one, the villains began to enter the mist until it was only Compress, who showed that the marbles were in his mouth, and the black-hair man, to whom Compress called Dobby. They were about to leave when a laser beam hit Compress on the side of the face. The hit caused the villain to drop the marbles from his mouth. The trio began charging the 2 marbles, only for Izuku to drop to his knees as the overuse of his quirk began to take a toll on him, opting Shoji and Shoto to take the marbles. A fact that the former had accomplished. However, Todoroki was not as lucky as Dobby snatched the marble first. How sad, Shoto Todoroki, Dobby said, fingers clutching the marble. Izuku forced his body to stand up, but it was no use. He used too much biomass. But even with that, he used all his willpower to take a step and another, until he was sprinting towards the villains, who had just released the marble and showed Katsuki being held on the neck by Dobby. Katsuki, Izuku yelled desperately. Stay back, Izuku, was the blonde's last words before the mist completely engulfed them, and with that the villain, alongside Katsuki, were gone. Izuku was sobbing uncontrollably. He had failed. He had failed to save Katsuki. What kind of pro-hero fails to save one student? Or did he? Izuku's cries began to turn into chuckles before it turned into full-blown laughter. He turned to the side near the foliage of trees, Katsuki walking out of the bushes, a smirk creeping onto his face. The same could be said with Shoto and Shoji. Izuku smirked back at his classmates as his form began to wobble. Phase 1 complete, Izuku said before collapsing into a pile of red mud. Chapter 33. Symbol of Evil. Previously. Izuku smirked back at his classmates as his form began to wobble. Phase 1 complete, Izuku said before collapsing into a pile of mud. Within the walls of a familiar bar within Kamino Ward, the League of Villains, or rather, the remaining team, gathered around the counter as they looked over at an unconscious form of Katsuki Bakugo in the corner of the room. A look of satisfaction and victory can be seen through the eyes of Tamura Shigaraki. The abduction was a success. The League of Villains just acquired a new party member, he thought before looking back at his gathered team. But we were reduced by 3. Which is unfortunate. Oh well. We got what we needed for the League's success, he thought as he took a swig of his drink. As he did, he failed to see Katsuki open one eye as a smirk formed on his face. Phase 1, complete. Initiate Phase 2 in T-15 minutes, he thought as he looked down the cuffs on his arms. Good thing this quirk suppressors are not as strong as UA's. If it were, then my disguise would be busted, he thought. Unlike the belief of the League about their successful abduction, they failed to double-check who the person they abducted. Because they never abducted Katsuki Bakugo, the person they got is Izuku Midoriya. And they had heard of this abduction before the villains could arrive at the camp and had made a plan to counter this. It all started the night of the day Class 1A arrived at the camp. Flashback A/N, Chapter 31. As Izuku walked into the thick foliage of trees that shielded the ground of any light coming from the full moon, wandering deeper into the forest as he followed a silhouette of a person using his sonar senses. He recognized the person's silhouette but was confused and worried how they found out about their location. Whatever they wanted from them, he was going to find out. No matter what. As he reached the location, he stood face to face with the person and gave them an erasure-filled glare. I'm gonna say this in the most respectful way possible. What the buck are doing here? How did you find us? He asked as black light began surrounding his arms. He was going to get an answer from this person, one way or another. The person just looked at him with raised hands. No need for hostilities, Izuku Midoriya. I came in peace, he started, causing Izuku to scoff. I highly doubt that, Izuku said in a growl. Touché. The person started chuckling, which didn't amuse Izuku one bit, before opting for a serious stare. But in all seriousness, I didn't come here to cause any troubles to any of you currently in your precious camp. Well, at least not yet. That caused Izuku's glare to harden as claws subconsciously manifested over his arms. What do you mean by not yet? He asked, his patience slowly disappearing, and it was evident with the killing intent he was projecting. I mean that the League of Villains will attack in 2 days, the same time as today, the person said. Izuku's eyes widened at that. But before he could respond, the person continued. Those who will be arriving here consist of a few villains and a Nomu, with the sole purpose of abducting a student. Who's their target? Izuku asked, seriousness evident in his voice. The person looked at him for a bit before dropping the bomb. Katsuki Bakugo. His serious demeanor dropped to shock. They want Katsuki? But why? Why would they pick Katsuki of all people? He thought, confusion showing in his face. Seemingly reading his mind, the person spoke up. I believe Tamura Shigaraki wanted your classmate to join the league due to his violent behavior back in the sports festival. Plus the fact that Katsuki Bakugo somehow has a violent relationship with you. That actually makes sense, Izuku thought. But as he thought of that, he realized something. Even if Katsuki has violence written all over him, I doubt that he would join the League of Villains. I've known him all my life, and I know that he wanted to be a hero since we were babies, he said, looking up to the person in front of him. The person hummed in response. I figured that'd be the case, he said before looking back at the boy. But regardless, he is the prime target of the League during the event that will occur in 2 days. I wish for you all to be prepared for this, the person said before turning to leave. As he took a few steps away, Izuku called out. How can I know that you aren't lying? Heck, how can I know that you aren't tricking me right now? The person halted on his tracks and turned around. The person placed their hand in their pocket and tossed something towards Izuku. The young hero looked at the object thrown and saw that it was a vial with what appears to be blood. That blood came from one of the villains in the group that will be abducting Katsuki Bakugo. I know that you can copy anyone's quirk by consuming their DNA, so I hope that this will be enough for you to trust me, the person said as he walked away to the deeper parts of the forest, completely leaving Izuku's sight. Izuku just looked at the vial in his hand before placing it in his pocket. You guys heard that right? Izuku said to the readers. No, wait, cut, that's not part of the script. Izuku in the forest scene, take 2. You guys heard that right? Izuku said. As soon as he said that, Shoto and Katsuki emerged from the bushes as they approached him. The duo just nodded at his words as they looked at the direction where the person had gone. Loud and clear, Shoto said. Katsuki could only huff in agreement. He opted to click his tongue. So Handjob wants me to join their stupid group, he said as a frown showed in his face. Am I really that bad a few months ago? Izuku and Shoto just looked at him with a knowing look, causing him to blush and look away. Don't answer that, he grumbled. Smart choice, Todoroki said, causing the ash-blonde boy to glare at him. So what do we do now? He asked Izuku. The green-haired boy looked at him with a serious expression. What else? We go tell Mr. Aizawa and the Hussycats. They deserve to know, he said before a plan entered his mind. Plus, I think I have a plan to propose to them, he mumbled with an evil smirk on his face, causing his classmates to gulp and take a step back in reflex. The last time they saw that look from their class president, they got their asses kicked. I almost feel bad for them, Shoto and Katsuki thought simultaneously. Almost. End of flashback. That same night, Izuku and the other two had informed Eraserhead, the WWPC, Vlad King, and the rest of the UA staff, the latter being through a video call, about what the young hero had talked about with the rogue LOV member. To say that they were skeptical with the villain's words, but Izuku told them about the blood vial that the person had given him. They questioned the legitimacy of the blood, to which Izuku drank, much to the shock of the heroes. But the moment Izuku receives the memories of the villain, which according to him was a villain named Jin Babaigawara, also known by the alias, twice, quirk, double, allows the user to create an exact replica of anything or anyone but can be reduced back to a mud-like state if hit with a certain amount of damage. A versatile quirk if you ask Izuku, but having gone to the wrong hands could be trouble all over. But even with that and this Jin guy being the person with this quirk, Izuku couldn't tell if it is a good thing or a bad thing that the double user was in the LOV. At a first glance, it's bad that the man is a villain. But looking into the man's memories, Izuku saw that the man was just misunderstood. To which, Izuku wants to talk to Jin, to save the man from the influence of the League. Plus the fact that the man's purpose in joining the League of Villains was to search for the only person that he views as a sister, Himiko Toga. A/N, insert dramatic. Dun dun dun! Sound effect here. That's why Izuku proposed to be the one to take Katsuki's place, by disguising as the explosion user, to be abducted. As soon as he said that, everyone in the room looked at him as if he had grown a second head, which wasn't really impossible, and almost immediately declined. It was Nizu, All Might, and surprisingly, Aizawa who had agreed with the plan. Seeing that there are a lot of positive outcomes in this plan. Though, there could be negative outcomes to this plan, but if done correctly could come to their advantage in capturing the villains. As soon as the plan was finalized, Izuku informed some of his classmates. Them being Mezu, Fumikage, Koji, Hitoshi, Mashireo, Tsuyu, Momo, and Melissa. Why only them? Because they are the only ones who would follow orders from the heroes, the rest have a tendency to go through their emotions such as Aijiro, Ochako, and Mina. Though Tenya was trustworthy, he has a tendency to be swayed to do the opposite. Heck, the blue-haired boy almost went to Hosa just to hunt down Stain a few months ago. Regardless of that, the plan was simple. Izuku disguises as Katsuki and gets himself abducted. There he waits for the heroes to arrive in the area and he reveals himself to capture the League of Villains. Simple, right? There's no way this plan would be bucked up. Right? Right? Well, let's hope for the best. He slowly opened his eyes and faked a groan as though he had just woken up. On instinct and a way to be more convincing, he immediately widened his eyes and tried lunging forward, like how Katsuki used to be. His acting made the villains smirk at his efforts of escape. He was about to yell at the villains when he heard a noise coming from the television that he just now realized was turned on and was showing a live broadcast of a press conference with Nizu, Aizawa, and Vlad King alongside with reporters from different news stations questioning UA about the compiling villain attacks on the students. Izuku's eyes widened as some of the reporters continued to criticize them. He was confused on why these people would be this quick to judge them. Izuku was then snapped out of his stare at the television when he heard Shigaraki huff in amusement. "It's quite mysterious, isn't it?" the villain said, causing the young hero to look at him. "Why are the heroes getting criticized?" The man continued to talk about the flaws of the hero system. He listened as Compress tried to justify how they didn't just casually abduct him, and they were being shackled by the heroes' society. So they want Katsuki to join them because they think that he was being held back by the law and heroes around him? Spinner, a Stain fanboy, then talks about how heroes aren't heroes anymore when they protect others by demanding compensation, be it by money, power, or fame. Which has a point, but it being Stain's ideology of killing heroes to lessen the corruption isn't a good solution to it. But thinking about it made Izuku question himself, as he too killed villains. Was he also a hypocrite? Was he also a villain? Can he still be called a hero after all of the deaths that he had caused? The green-haired boy disguised as Ash Blonde didn't talk nor meet the villain's eye as he looked down and used his sonar senses and noticed a group of people outside of the vicinity. He recognizes some of them as All Might and Endeavor. Inwardly, he smirked as his plan was progressing. He then felt the cuff on his hand release the full strength of his quirk well, not like half of it was suppressed anyway. He raised his hand and massaged it, trying to remove the slight numb feeling on it. He then saw a hand in front of him and looked up to the owner, which happened to be Shigaraki. "Katsuki Bakugo, I am extending my hand to you to help you get off the shackles of the hypocrisy of the two faces we call heroes. The League welcomes you as a mem. He was cut off as an explosive hand hit him in the face, causing him to take a step back and the hand on his face to fly off to the floor. Everyone in the room looked over at him. They then looked over at Shigaraki, who was looking over at the discarded hand/glove on the wooden floor. "Bold of you to assume that Katsuki was going to join your little club," he said, not caring if he had sabotaged his own disguise. "Like, I can understand all of your motives, but you're just the same as the heroes you call hypocrites. If the heroes have selfish actions, then what does it make you?" Izuku heard Shigaraki mumble something before picking up the glove on the ground. He then began looking over at a nearby monitor. "Teacher, lend me your strat." Izuku didn't let him finish as he shot another explosion at the monitor, shattering it in the process. That caused Kurogyari and Shigaraki's eyes to widen as they looked over at the debris scattered across the floor. "But look at me when I'm talking to you," Izuku said in a serious tone. The look of malice on Shigaraki's face grew as the villain. The man-child then charged at him with his hands forward. "You bastard," he said as he made contact with the blonde boy, only to be confused that his quirk wasn't working. "Why?" He was cut off once more when the student kicked him in the stomach, sending him to the ground. Before Shigaraki could stand up, a knock came from the entrance as a voice called out, "Hello, pizza delivery." Everyone, besides Izuku, blinked in confusion as they stared at the door. That's until the wall of the bar exploded. Smash! All Might's voice echoed within the explosion of debris. The villains began to panic as Shigaraki called out to Kurogyari to open a warp gate. Before the latter could do that, Kamui Woods used his quirk and tied up all the villains, while Gran Torino, an elderly hero, sped past the villains' defenses and knocked Dabi out. As expected from the young and talented Kamui Woods and the assuming veteran, Gran Torino, All Might started. "You can't run away, League of Villains, why, you ask?" "Because we are here," the number one hero declared with a smile. Despite the mask hiding his face, the panic was evident with compressed voice. "All Might? That press conference, then the timing, it was all planned?" "Mr. Tree Guy, you're pulling too tight, more pressure," Twice said. "This time around, we won't be as careless," the voice of Edge Shot called out from the door as he slid in. "The pizza delivery, it's not just us. We've got more skilled heroes like Endeavor surrounding the outside with the police." "It must have been scary, you did well to endure, well done, young Bakugo," All Might said before smirking. "Or should I say young Midoriya?" The members of the League's eyes widened as black and red tendrils began to escape the blonde boy's body as he morphed into a smirking Izuku. "Yo," he said as he raised his hand and winked at Shigaraki, who was growling with hate to the young hero. "You bastard, you tricked us!" the Decay user yelled out to the UA student. "I'll bucking kill you!" He then turned to Kurogyari. "Kurogyari, bring as many of them as you can," he barked out. "Bring the NOMU." It took a few seconds, but nothing came. That's when Kurogyari spoke up. "I'm sorry, Tamura Shigaraki, but the Nomas that should be at the designated location aren't there?" All Might then explained that another team of heroes had already raided the other location and eliminated the Nomas. A fact that Izuku had smirked at. "Well done, Momo. No more games. It ends here, Tamura Shigaraki." "It ends here, you say? Don't make me laugh, we've only gotten started." Izuku could see from the side that Shigaraki was gritting his teeth. "Justice, peace, this rubbish heap society capped by such vague concepts, I will destroy it, and I'll start by removing the cap that is All Might. I've only just begun to gather comrades' nonsense, this is just the beginning." Kurug. He was cut off when Kurogyari groaned and slumped, indicating his unconsciousness. That caused a panicked reaction from Magna, a woman with a muscular build. That's when they saw Edge Shot appear as a string coming out of Kurogyari's neck, being the one to stun Kurogyari. Shigaraki was shaking in fury. Everything was crumbling before his eyes, the irony. Panic began to ensue within Shigaraki's head as he tried to disintegrate the wood, but he could feel his quirk. "No point using your quirk, I erased it." He looked up to Izuku, whose eyes were glowing red and his hair floating. That look on his face, I hate it, all the villain thought as his anger rose. "Where is he now, Shigaraki?" All Might yelled at the villain. "I hate you," Tamura yelled out in return. As he did that, black sludge erupted from behind him as Nomus appeared out of nowhere. Everyone in the room was shocked at this. Izuku was about to launch himself to the Nomus when he felt something weird. The heroes were frantic about the newcomers. His thoughts were cut off when he began coughing out the black sludge as it began to envelop him. He tried calling out All Might, but it was too late. From within the sludge, he could feel his surroundings shift. As soon as he escaped the black sludge, he began coughing violently, the slimy texture causing discomfort to him. That's when he noticed that he was no longer in the bar as he looked around. His eyes widened in shock as he noticed that he was in the middle of what appears to be a crater. Collapsed buildings, broken glass shards, injured heroes scattered around the area. Where am I? He thought out loudly. This is confusing. A voice called out from behind him, causing him to flinch. You're not Katsuki Bakugo. Just the presence of the person behind him caused every single muscle in his body to go tense, as he felt suffocated by the intimidating aura in the air. Slowly and shakily, he turned around. As he does, he is met by a man as tall as All Might, wearing a black suit and what looks to be a mask covering his whole face. Just the aura and appearance gives out an authoritative and powerful impression to Izuku. The young hero gritted his teeth. Whoever this man is, Izuku could tell that he was a force to be reckoned with. Before he could say anything, he felt coughing from behind him. Turning a bit, his eyes widened when he saw that all of the members of the League of Villain had also been transported to their location. The man began comforting Tamura. That was the moment that Izuku realized that he was surrounded. Izuku readied himself for combat. Before he could do anything, he heard something approaching them in full speed. It looks like he's coming after all. As soon as the mysterious figure said it, a speeding blue and yellow blur went past Izuku's peripheral vision. Said blur, who Izuku identified as All Might, attacked the figure, who caught the fists with ease. I'm gonna make you give everything back, all for one. The thunderous voice of the number one hero yelled out. You're going to kill me again, All Might? The man, now identified to be called All for One, responded back as he pushed All Might back. The number one hero landed beside the 35th, who had just kicked Spinner and Magna away. The teacher and student duo stood back to back as they eyed the villains around them. They were clearly outnumbered, but both have strength to spare. Glancing at each other, they both nodded and went back to look at the villains. Izuku then began channeling his quirk as he summoned his muscle mass. Without a word, they charged on their respective opponents, All Might with All for One and Izuku with the rest of the league. They have to stall for time as the heroes are still on their way. Chapter 34. Sacrifice. In the 1A dorm. As the impending battle in the Kamino ward was about to rage on, Class 1A sat anxiously in the common room, their eyes glued to the television as they watched the press conference between the UA staff, consisting of Eraserhead, Vlad King, and Principal Nizu, and the reporters, who began questioning the staff on the safety of the students under the school's care. To say that they were shocked at the doubtful questions being thrown at their teachers was an understatement. They would understand that the safety of the students is a priority, but they are hero in training. Trouble is something that they will encounter along the way. Plus the fact that the public does not know that the victim of the hostage-taking is actually a disguised Izuku. But still, the hostility was suffocating for the young heroes. More affecting Shinso and Melissa, Himiko being a former villainess is used to the hostile words. But that doesn't make it easier for them to take the harsh words being said to their teachers. Across the room, Eijiro Kurishima stood up from his seat, causing some of his friends to look at him. We can't just sit here and watch all of this happen, right? He asked his classmates. We need to do something. The rest of the class looked over at the hardening user, but none of them responded at the red-haired boy's words. They were all unsure what to say. Well, everyone beside one. For the last time, shitty hair. We can't do anything about it. Katsuki spoke up. Izuku told us not to get involved with this because we don't have a hero license. Some of them nodded as Momo spoke up. That's right. Which means Izuku doesn't want any of us to get in trouble with our teacher or the authorities, she added to Katsuki's words. Despite the words of their vice president, Kurishima was still not convinced. But if he really thought of that, why didn't he tell everyone of his plans? It was Ida who spoke up this time to respond to the red-haired boy. Because he knows that some of us will be riled up with our emotions and ignore the orders of our teachers so we can get involved with the plan. I have to agree with him on that notion because, quite frankly, I would be easily swayed by my emotions. I almost did so back in Hosu," he said, whispering the last words. "All we can do now is wait for the best to happen in the plan and pray for our classmates, and the heroes fighting alongside him." That caused a couple of nods from the rest while the others just sat there deep in thought. There was an awkward silence within the class when Kaminari suddenly spoke up. "Ah, guys," he said, slowly looking back at his classmates. "You might want to see this," he said, pointing to the television. The class turned to the television and were shocked at the sight that met them. Broadcasting live is a helicopter shot of the destruction in Kamino Ward in Yokohama. The pro-heroes can be seen laying down in the epicenter of the crater that once were buildings and apartments. In the center of it all is a man with a mask that looks like respirators. Their eyes widened as they saw another figure emerge from thin air, covered in black sludge. They recognized the figure as their own class president, Izuku Midoriya, who was coughing out the sludge from his mouth. It didn't take long for more figures emerging from black sludge to enter the shot. They watched as All Might suddenly arrived in the scene and was face to face with the villain. The villain blocked his attack and forced All Might to jump back and land back to back with Izuku, who had just kicked some of the villains away. Class 1A's eyes widened at the scene showing as both teacher and student began to charge the villains with speed unimaginable. Kamino, Yokohama. Explosions and metal clanging can be heard throughout Kamino as Izuku and All Might push off the villains trying to attack them. Or in Izuku's case, who now equipped with his muscle masks and punch spinner swords as the blades shattered on impact as the attack caused the scattering blades on the ground as he delivered a kick to the reptilian villain towards the other villains, stopping them from walking through the portal that All for One created using Kurogiri's quirk. He then landed in a crouch before he was forced to jump away as he narrowly avoided Shigaraki's hand from touching him. As he did that, he could feel his body being pulled as a bright blue light covered his whole body. Before he knew it, he was pulled towards Magna as the buff woman readied her weapon to use it as a club. Brows furrowing, Izuku used the momentum to tilt his body fast enough to summon his shield to block the giant magnet. The impact caused a shockwave that blew dust clouds, forcing some of the villains to shield their eyes. Taking advantage of the close distance, Izuku let some of his tendrils wrap around the giant magnet. He then raised his free arm and pointed it at Magna. Without a word, an explosion escaped Izuku's palm as it pushed Magna away, deactivating the blue light surrounding him. He could have always used Zone Erasure to deactivate all of the villain's quirks, but doing so would have also affected All Might, which in turn would have caused All Might's muscle form to deteriorate, exposing him to the public. Plus, he doesn't know what type of quirk All for One, the villain All Might is fighting at the moment, has. So it would be too risky to do so. His mind was interrupted as a strong air pressure erupted from the other side of the field as he saw All Might was flung towards the nearby buildings, destroying them in the process. His eyes widened at the strength of the pressure that just easily sent the number 1 hero flying. Atmospheric compression plus locomotive corkscrew. Explosiveness x4, muscular enhancement x3. All for One started as the dust covering him began to dissipate. This combo is pretty fun, maybe I'll collect some more augmentation-type quirks, the masked villain said as he opened and closed the hand that released the air pressure. Izuku, who was staring in shock at the true leader of the League of Villains, gritted his teeth as he charged forward to the villain, arms morphing into claws. He sped past Spinner and Twice, the latter falling down to his face. The young boy's eyes dead set onto the villain as he opted for a slashing motion. As his attack began closing in on the villain, Izuku failed to see the villain's fingers darkening in a black color with red lines extending towards his torso. The moment he saw that, he felt it puncture through his back. He could feel his spine cracking at the force and speed of the attack. The hit forced him to release his claws as he clutched at the tendrils stabbing his body. Quite a powerful quirk you have there, Izuku Midoriya. It would be nicer if it were mine, the villain said as the tendrils' red lines began to glow. That didn't sound like good news to Izuku. Whatever the villain means, he doesn't want to know. He had to do something quick before the villain could do what he was planning. He groaned at the pain carving into his literal bones as his right arm quickly shifted to his blade and slashed the hardened tendrils off of his body before kicking off the villain. He jumped off a few meters away from All for One but had to drop down on one knee as he clutched his bleeding chest, which was beginning to heal. He gritted his teeth as he slowly stood up, eyes picking up a figure to the side causing a smirk to form from his lips. This caught All for One's attention. Before the man could ask, All Might came back, his fist hitting All for One square in the face, sending the villain flying towards the debris. So much for Izuku's amusement, he failed to notice the other villains charging towards him in a pincer attack. The moment Izuku noticed, he was already surrounded. But before the villains could lay a finger onto him, a yellow blur impacted on each of the villains surrounding him. The hits caused the villains to be knocked out instantly. Izuku watched as Gran Torino had joined the fray as the soles of his boots released air pressure that helped him perform such quick maneuvers. All Might looked up to his former teacher with a serious expression. "You're late." The old man scoffed at his blonde student. "You're just too fast to keep up with," he said as he hovered a few feet up the ground. All for One took note of the newly arrived villain and recognized him. Shimura's close friend, he thought as he slowly stood up from the debris. "Hey kid, you okay there?" Gran Torino asked, pointing at Izuku. Izuku then patted his chest and noticed the wounds and pain had dissipated. He nodded at the retired hero. "Yeah. I'm all healed up. Thanks for the save, sir," he said to the man. Said man just smirks. "At least he's not as cocky as some people I know," he thought before noticing Shigaraki running towards them. "There's one more villain over here, you're done for," he yelled as he flew towards the decay user. As he does so, All for One noticed the disadvantage and used the tendrils from before and elongated them. "You got us good, didn't you, in one fell swoop no less?" the man said as the tendrils moved towards All Might, who barely dodged it. "The tables have been turned," the villain said. All Might watched as the tendrils pierced the unconscious Magna on the chest. This confused Tashina before All for One spoke up once more. "Force activation, magnetism," the villain said as the lone female member of the league began glowing. As Sorihiko was getting close to Tamura, the latter stood his ground and reached out his hand to use his quirk to the old man. "Turn to dust." As the two were about to collide, Shigaraki's body began to glow blue. He was then pulled backwards by Magna's quirk. The rest of the unconscious members of the League of Villains, besides Kurogiri and Magna, began launching one by one into the warp gate. Izuku gritted his teeth as he failed to grab Twice's unconscious body. They watched as All for One unceremoniously tossed Magna into the portal as the tendrils hit Gran Torino away from Shigaraki. "No, teacher," Tamura said, eyes widening at his master's actions. "With that body you're—" He was cut off when a green, red, and black blur appeared in front of the drifting villain. Before Shigaraki could fully identify the person in front of him, he felt a stinging pain on his arm, or at least where they used to be, as said limbs fell down to the ground, blood and gore spraying out of the cut-off limbs. "You'll pay for this, you bastard!" was the last thing Shigaraki said as he saw Izuku's glaring eyes. Tamura's scream in pain and anger echoed through the portal before he was fully shrouded into the portal. The black mist dissipated as Izuku stood there, blade still positioned down, failing to notice Shigaraki's blood began to get absorbed into his body. "That's for disintegrating my arm back in USJ, you son of a hitch," he thought as he stood up. Not long after he straightened his stance, an intense killing intent covered the field. Slowly turning to the epicenter of the KI, and saw All for One looking at his direction. "You insolent brat, do you have any idea what you just did?" All for One spoke in a dark tone that made Izuku back off a bit. Before the man could elaborate or Izuku could respond, All Might flew forward, a fist cocked back aiming at All for One's covered head. Transmission, All for One thought as black sludge covered Gran Torino's body. The sludge suddenly appeared in front of the villain, as did Gran Torino, who took the punch straight to the face. Impact reversal, he thought as All Might's fist recoiled back. "Sorry," All Might called out to Gran Torino. "Even though I came here just to save Tamura." The man started as he pointed his left arm over at Izuku, who was charging forward with his muscle mass equipped. If it's a fight you want, then it's a fight you'll get. Izuku's eyes widened as the villain sent another air pressure towards him. He tried dodging it but was unable to do so as the attack sent him flying and tumbling in the debris before stopping as he crashed through glass. Chunks of debris and glass shards scattered everywhere as the young hero shakily stood up. Even with his shock nullification, he couldn't help but be affected by the villain's attack. Just how strong is that man? Izuku thought as he could hear the distant sounds of the battlefield, even the faint helicopter in the air. Looking around, he was confused at the sight that met him. Large glass containers that had tubes inside and outside of them. There was a nauseating scent, probably a mix of blood and chemicals, that entered Izuku's nostrils, almost causing him to vomit his dinner. As he looked around, his eyes widened at a familiar pile of clothing. Approaching the pile, he grit his teeth as he crouched down to pick up Ragdoll's headpiece, now broken in half and had blood on it. Those bastards, he thought, using consume on the blood residue. Closing his eyes, he watched through Ragdoll's memories how the villains had ambushed her from the shadows. He saw how a Nomu with blades extruding from its body had attacked her and caused her to be injured before she barely escaped to try to inform his comrades about the attack, but she was then cornered by Dabi. The last thing Izuku saw in her memories is how she was suddenly surrounded by black mist as she blacked out. They'll pay for this, he thought as he stood up. Now All for One is going to feel hell. He was about to charge back to the fight when he was forced to grit his teeth as another wave of memories entered his mind. Veins pulsing as he clutched his head as a blurry image of ashes and a crumbled backyard with puddles of blood appeared in his mind. He was shocked at the memory as he looked around. Whose memory is this? He thought to himself. His inner thoughts were interrupted when he heard a massive explosion coming from the battlefield. The explosion caused him to run towards the direction of the field. Halting at the exit of the collapsing building, his eyes widened at the sight that met him. No, he said as he began charging forward towards the villain, with his quirk morphing through his limbs. The crowd in the busy street of Kamino Ward couldn't believe their eyes. All Might, the #1 hero, and known as the symbol of peace, is standing face to face with probably the strongest villain he had fought since his debut. Their eyes widened as their hero tanked a shockwave that destroyed the ground he was standing on. As the smoke that formed from the shockwave dissipated, shock and confusion entered their minds. The usually bulky and muscular blond man was replaced by a skin and bones that would only take a breeze to push down. What has happened? Everyone is seeing this, right? The voice from the screen in the buildings in Yokohama. All Might seems to be withering away. No, it can't be, one of the crowd said. All Might, another one spoke. You have to win. The rest of the crowd were confused, uncertain, shocked, and in disbelief. But they all know one thing. All Might has to win this. He needs to win this. Don't lose, All Might. You can do it. Everyone yelled out from deep within their hearts. Class 1A were shocked at the sight that met the screen of their common room television. They couldn't believe the state that All Might is in. Most of them had their hands covering their mouths. Melissa was not having the best time of her life. Her Uncle Might, the person who had become her second father and had been there for her ever since. The person who gave her a chance to help people through passing on One for All to her. That person, looking terribly battered at the current fight. Uncle Might, she whispered as tears flowed down her cheek as Momo held her close. What? Katsuki watched in horror at the form of the person he looked up to the most. The person that made him believe that being a hero means victory towards every villain that they come across. But looking at the state that the man is in, baffled him. No, this can't be happening, he thought as his chest began to tighten as his breath quickened. All Might, he whispered, his hands clenching and unclenching as tears welled in his eyes. Win, All Might, he yelled as his class followed suit. Those hollow cheeks and sunken eyes, a pitiful excuse for a top hero if I ever see one. All for One taunted as Tashinori dropped down on one knee, coughing blood non-stop. But don't be ashamed. That is your true form from the beginning, after all, isn't it? The villain chuckled darkly. All Might could only glare at the villain as his quirk's limit made itself known. Before he could talk back, All for One spoke up once more. The entirety of Japan now sees just how weak their symbol of peace is, the man said before turning back at the thin man. And now, they will witness his death. All for One said, as red sparks of lightning surrounded his outstretched arm, which released a ripping sound as it expanded in size. Goodbye, All Might, All for One said. He was about to shoot the amplified bolt when, GK, he yelped in pain as he could feel a sharp object pierce through his shoulder blade. Get over here! From behind, Izuku yelled out as he pulled the villain towards him and launched the man towards the collapsed building, causing debris and dust to explode on impact. Landing in front of All Might, Izuku used his tendrils and sent parts of them towards the direction of All for One. Before it could land, Izuku released his hold from the tendrils and created two brawler hunters from the biomass released, which charged at All for One's direction. Turning towards the number 1 hero's direction, he winced at the battered state that the man he looked up to. The memory of their first meeting flashed in Izuku's mind. The memory of the first time he saw the man in action and saving civilians from an accident, how he smiled through the devastated surroundings to ease up those around him. He compared that man to the man in front of him and gritted his teeth. It was his fault this was happening. It was his plan that led to this confrontation with All for One. It was his plan that caused All Might's vulnerable form to be exposed to the public. It was all his damn fault this is happening. Young Midoriya, that snapped him out of his self-deprecation. Looking up to the man in front of him, who was shakily standing up. He saw a weak smile on the hero's face, and it caused tears to well in his eyes. I know you are blaming yourself for this, but don't be. There is nothing to be sorry about. Be but All Might. He was cut off when All Might gave him a stern look. But nothing, young Midoriya, the man said. Whether tonight I survive or not, it doesn't matter. I had a long run, and looking back at your class and you specifically, I know that the future is safe even without me in it, the man said, giving him a reassuring smile. All Might, Izuku said, only to be interrupted by slow clapping from behind. Looking back, his eyes widened at All for One, who was now floating up in the air. Izuku noticed the man's mask was now destroyed, leaving his face, if you can still consider to call it that, exposed for the world to see. How heartwarming, the villain said sarcastically. You almost made me cry there, All Might. Almost, the man said, landing down on the ground. Izuku followed the man's move and widened his eyes at the sight behind the man. His brawlers lay lifeless on the ground and were mutilated. His eyes filled with fury as he began to walk towards the villain. He only got to walk 2 steps forward before collapsing on one knee. Young Midoriya, All Might called out. Damn it, I overused my quirk again, he thought as he gritted his teeth. All for One stared at him with mirth. What's this? Little hero out of steam? The man started, smirking at the growl that escaped Izuku's mouth. That's a shame, I was looking forward to going toe-to-toe with you. Oh well, the man said as his fingers formed his own tendrils, elongating as it stabbed on Izuku's shoulders and pulled him towards the man. I'll just take your quirk then, the man said. All Might watched in horror as the villain held Izuku by the head. He saw a familiar red aura surrounding the man's hand. No, he yelled in his mind. Gran Torino also looked in horror. He was about to charge the man, but his injuries and old age are stopping him from doing anything. All for One expected the familiar surge of power and energy to enter his veins as he stole the little hero's quirk. But there was no power nor energy. He was so confused. That's when his mind suddenly felt like he was being warped into somewhere. He was confused as an image of a blood-stained rooftop flashed in his mind. What confused him even more is a figure standing by the edge of the building. What he thought as the figure turned around to face him. The figure radiated the aura of a predator that had just seen its prey. The aura that All for One usually radiates towards his victims. You're not Izuku, the figure said. A scrutinizing look can be felt by the villain as claws formed on the figure's hands. Leave, the figure said as he charged forward, sharp blades piercing through All for One. That shook the villain off his stupor as he was brought back to reality. The young man was still in his hand, clutching his hand, trying to break free. He stared at the boy with a frown on his face. Not being able to take the boy's powerful quirk was unfortunate, but he had to move on. Useless, he said to Izuku as he unceremoniously tossed the boy to the ground, near the brawlers' mutilated bodies. Since you have no use for me, he started as he summoned his quirks while floating upward. Then die. Muscular Enhancement X4, Locomotive Corkscrew, Sharpness X4, Piercing X3, he mentally commanded as his hand began to mimic a drill. Goodbye, Blackwatch, he said as he flew towards Izuku's shaking form at full speed. All Might looked on in horror at what the villain was planning to do to his student. He had to do something. And no, he needs to do something. He's a hero for Buck's sake. He can't let another person dear to him die by the hands of that monster master. Please give me strength, he thought. Despite his body trembling as the limit of his quirk was pulling him down to the ground, he pushed forwards. Using the remaining embers of his quirk to his legs, he ran forward. Gran Torino yelled out towards him, but he ignored it as he ran. He ran and ran. And ran and ran. Closer and closer and closer and closer. The world seemed to slow down as he came in between them. His life flashes before his eyes. The mistake he had made in telling Izuku that he can't be a hero without a quirk, the grief he had felt the moment All for One had taken his master from him, and the happy moments he had felt in UA as the teacher of such heroic young boys and girls. But even with all of that, he stood tall. Looking up, he saw Izuku's face shocked at his sudden appearance. Even though I already apologized to you, I am very sorry for not believing in you, young Izuku. Before he knew it, All for One's fist punched through his chest. Everyone, even All for One, was stunned at All Might's actions. All Might's limp body slid off the villain's arm and dropped in front of Izuku, who just stared at the number one hero's lifeless body, a gaping hole in his chest cavity. Tears flowed down his freckled cheek as blood coming from All Might's wound began to make contact with his feet. The man just took the bullet for him, an attack that was sure going to kill him, even with his enhanced quirks. His breath hitched as he touched All Might's sunken eyes and closed the man's eyelids. As soon as he did that, he gritted his teeth as his eyes glared towards the man responsible for his hero's death. You, he said as blacklight shot out of his body and stabbed towards the brawler's body as he stood up from his spot. It took a few seconds for the brawlers to be fully consumed. Eyes glowing red under pitch black scaras radiated pure hate and anger as biomass began wrapping around his body. I will kill you! The biomass continued to cover him from head to toe until he was now covered in a thick and sharp exoskeleton with red pulsing veins radiating heat as his claws, now imbued with a darker shade, formed. Izuku looked down at his new form briefly before looking back at the villain with as much hate as he could muster. Screw being viewed as a murderer. Screw being viewed as a monster. Screw being viewed as a villain. He was going to kill All for One, as painfully as he possibly can. And no one in this world is going to stop him. Chapter 35. Top of the food chain. A gloom, somber atmosphere surrounds the air as the unforgiving rain falls from the cloudy ceiling that is the sky. The dark sky seems to match the emotions welling within the mind of one Izuku Midoriya. Standing in the middle of Japan's heroes' cemetery, he was looking down a specific tombstone while his face opted for a look filled with guilt, regret, and a hint of anger. Carved on the smooth, black granite tombstone is the name of the person he had failed to protect. The person who he was unable to save. On the pristine, charcoal stone, surrounded by white flowers, posters from his fans, and a lone picture in front, was etched with the following words. Here lies our beloved number one hero, the symbol of peace. A teacher, a friend, and a brother. Tashinori, All Might Yagi. Nothing is nobler than self-sacrifice. You will be missed, my friend. Izuku read the words carved on the stone, eyes forming tears that refused to fall down, not caring if he was getting drenched by the continuously falling rain. It had been a week since All Might's death, but it felt like it all just happened yesterday. The pain of seeing the fist pierce through the man's torso was etched into the young man's mind, haunting him in his dreams and whenever he closed his eyes. It was his fault. It was all his fault that Japan's greatest hero had died, on live television no less. Even with those around him telling him that it wasn't his fault, he knew too damn well that it was him and his plan who had caused All Might's demise. Just thinking about All Might's sudden death made it hard for him to breathe with the seething rage he had on himself. He would always think to himself, what worth of his powerful quirk and the copied ones in his arsenal if he was unable to use them to protect someone when needed the most? What's the point of having an overpowered ability if I can't even save All Might from All for One's sadistic hands? All for One, the other person responsible for All Might's death. The very person who had hunted, tormented, and according to All Might, had killed every one for All User, the number one hero being the most recent one. Just the thought of the bucking shitstain would always made Izuku's blood to boil. Even after killing the villain wasn't enough to quench the anger within Izuku's heart and mind. Flashback, a week ago. Heavy pants can be heard from within the exoskeleton of Izuku's armor. Despite his eyes being hidden under the armor's helm, All for One could feel the rage and potent killing intent that the young man is sending his way. The sheer intensity of the hate and anger that the Blacklight user is radiating made those watching this scene play out shiver and shake in fear. They could easily excuse that for watching All Might's gruesome, sudden death. But something tells them that it's much more than that. All for One, levitating up ahead, observed the young man with interest, mainly the activation of a new ability. It was unfortunate that he was unable to steal it, though that caused him to wonder. Why can't he steal it? Through the years of his existence, he had successfully stolen various quirks, may it be an emitter, transformation, or even mutation types. But Midoriya's quirk was an enigma to him. Not only was he unsuccessful in taking the quirk for himself, he was also pulled into the boy's mind. What confuses him further was the fact that he saw someone else inside the boy's mind. Who in the world was that man? And why was he inside Midoriya's mind? His inner thoughts were suddenly interrupted when Izuku spoke up. You, the young hero started, causing All for One to face his direction. You killed him, you will pay. The hate in the boy's voice was eminent, which caused All for One to smirk in amusement. Before he could respond, he felt the right side of him rise in temperature. Without a word, he sent a wind blast towards the right as the flames. From the tiny holes on Izuku's armor, he was able to see the flame hero's arrival, the usual scowl etched on the number 2 hero's face being sent to the levitating villain. Beside him was the ninja hero, Edge Shot, who was wearing a neutral expression before he saw All Might's body. Endeavor looked away from All for One to Izuku's direction. What are you? He paused as he now just saw the lifeless body of the number 1 hero. Izuku watched as a shocked expression morphed the scowl off the number 2. All for One turned to the new arrivals and hummed. Although they were all mediocre, he started as he leaned his head towards the hero's direction. To have taken care of the Nomu already. It's to be expected from the man that ascended to the 2nd rank. The villain watched as Endeavor the villain just stared at All Might's body. You like what you see, Endeavor? Be thankful, for I removed the obstacle to your goal of becoming number 1, he said. Without a word, Endeavor's flames grew as he looked up at the villain's direction. The faceless man hummed in interest as black lightning began to spark on his left hand and pointed it at the number 2 hero. As he was about to shoot Endeavor, he was forced to dodge Edgeshot's attack. Dodging to the side, he heard Endeavor fly towards him, a large blazing flame surrounding him. Before the attack could hit, he summoned his own fire and sent it towards Endeavor, who barely blocked it. Looking down the field, he noticed the rising hero that is Kamui Wood swooping in, using his quirk to retrieve Best Jeanist and Empty Lady's unconscious bodies, while Tiger, the brawn of the wild Hussycats, with Ragdoll on his arm, safely removes a civilian under the rubble. That civilian was the same one All Might had taken the hit for that led to his true form being exposed to the world. From the height he is levitating on, he could hear the distant cheers from a few blocks away, and it caused him to click his tongue. Avoiding another swing from Edgeshot's attacks, he spoke up. How annoying, he said as he sent a massive wind blast towards the ground. Said attack had forced the rest of the heroes to be sent flying in different directions. Heroism and self-sacrifice, what a joke, he said as his right arm began shifting and pulsing. Locomotive corkscrew, explosiveness X4, muscular enhancement X3, multiplication, hypertrophy, rivet, airwalk, bone spear. The shockwaves up until now have been to wear down your strength. Nothing lethal. But now, he said as he turned to Izuku's direction, who hadn't moved an inch, unflinching at the shockwaves the villain had sent down. I will strike you down, he said as his arms transformed into a grotesque amalgamation of hands, muscles, and bones protruding out of its sockets. Without another word, the villain blasts forward with his enhanced fist aiming for Izuku's head. Said young man didn't make a move and just stared at the incoming attack. The impact of the attack caused a cloud of smoke, dust, and debris to fly all over the place, causing those near its epicenter to cover their eyes. Even the helicopter watching over from the sky couldn't see anything. Everyone waited in anticipation, even those in their homes. Class 1A looked on as they consoled the sobbing Melissa's shield, having just witnessed her uncle might die, while Katsuki held on to Eri while Inko lay down on the sofa, having just passed out from dehydration from crying too much. The UA staff have lowered their heads at the loss of the number one hero. Even Aizawa was saddened. Their eyes widened when the dust cloud dissipated and the camera broadcasting the Kamino fight refocused. Back to Kamino, the dust settled to show All for One's fist being blocked by Izuku's clawed hand. All for One resisted a flinch in pain as his grotesque limb began slowly crumbling. If he had eyes right now, they would have been as wide as plates right now. Decay? Impossible. How, he thought. Panicking, All for One tried to pull his fist off of the boy's hand only for him to be pulled forward and be thrown towards the side. He was sent tumbling through debris, glass, and dirt. Shakily, All for One tries to raise himself off the ground, wincing at the pain his decaying right arm is experiencing. Pushing off the quirks he activated, he pushed in a regeneration quirk on the wound and gritted his teeth as he realized that he was only healing it slowly. Even with super regeneration, the damage of the quirk is way too potent. Turning towards Izuku's direction, he noticed that the boy's claws began shifting, with his left hand turning back to normal, while his right hand morphed into his blade. Before he could speak up, Izuku cut him off. Enough of your bucking rambling shit, the armored young man glacially said, eyes glowing red. You've dealt too much pain to those around you. Now you meet your end, he said as he bolted forward. A blast of explosion erupted from his feet, increasing his speed. And your end is me. In just a blink of an eye, pain exploded from All for One's exposed shoulder as blood gushed out of the wound. The suddenness of the attack had caused him to plummet back down to the ground. He gritted his teeth, he clutched his bleeding shoulder as he tried to heal it with a regeneration quirk he had, only for a small blade to pierce through his left shoulder blade. He was then pulled towards Izuku, who performed a corkscrew flip and released All for One, which sent the villain flying. Izuku quickly morphed his arms into his tendrils as it sent it towards the villain, wrapping all around the man's body. With all his strength, he pulled the man back to the ground. The impact caused a large crater with All for One in the middle of it. Barely moving, he could hear heavy footsteps walking towards him. The footsteps stopped directly at his side. Before he could talk, a hand clutched his neck and lifted him up. The grip was hard and made him choke out as his remaining hand tried its best to hold on tight at the person's arm. Feeling his throat getting crushed, he choked out, Who are you? He felt himself being pulled near the person's side, shivering at the cold feeling of the exoskeleton as it brushed over his exposed head. I am Izuku Midoriya, the man whispered coldly in his ear. The reincarnation of Alex Mercer. Alex Mercer? Why does that name sound familiar? He thought as a faint memory entered his mind. An image of him in his younger self after killing the owner of the first recorded quirk bearer, flying past a place filled with blood and guts covering the ground as monstrosities being caused chaos as a person could be seen perched in a building, looking down the chaos in the streets below. Before he could even continue the memory, a clawed hand pierced his chest, snapping him out of his trance. He cried in pain as he turned back to Izuku, who whispered again in his ear, And I am the top of the food chain. Those were the last words he heard. Izuku raised his left hand and began stabbing the man in the chest. He could feel the man's chest cavity crack on impact, spraying blood all over him, but he didn't care. He stabbed him again. And again. And again. And again. And again. Those watching the scene stopped themselves throwing up their guts. They were shocked at the sheer violence of the action. Is this how a hero should be? Until the carcass in his hand was no longer identifiable. With one strong grip, he crushed the man's neck. As soon as he did that, red and black tendrils wrapped around the mutilated pile of flesh and absorbed it into his body, alongside the blood covering him. Within Izuku's mind, All for One materialized once more with a frown on his face. He was back in the same spot as he was just a few moments ago. The first time was when he had attempted to steal the green-haired boy's quirk. Right now, he couldn't remember how or why he was in here in the first place. His frown changed into a smirk. But this is a good chance to take over the boy's body and make it his vessel. A body with an extremely powerful quirk with a variety of weapons and abilities. Only thing he needs to do is wait patiently until the boy's mental strength is weakened before taking advantage of it. Yes, that would be a brilliant plan. And no one will be able to stop him. Are you sure about that? A familiar voice said from the side. Turning, his eyes widened at the sight of the same figure he saw back when he tried to steal the boy's quirk. Looking closely at the man, he recognized him. He was the man from his memories. The person that was on that rooftop. Alex Mercer, All for One said, taking a step back as for the first time in his life, he felt fear. In the flesh, Alex replied, a smirk appearing on his face. Now what was that about taking over Izuku's body? He said. Claws was summoned. All for One's cries of pain distorted within Izuku's mindscape as Alex did a reenactment of how Izuku had killed the symbol of evil. With that, All for One was no more. Both physically and spiritually. And most importantly, permanently. Memories flooded Izuku's mind, but he ignored it all as he released his armor and walked towards All Might's body. Staring down at the symbol of peace's lifeless body, Izuku crouched down as he picked up All Might in a bridal carry. With a blank look on his face, Izuku began walking out of the destruction. He ignored Endeavor and Gran Torino, who just looked at him with a shocked expression. He walked in a straight line, until he was out of the destroyed portion of Kamino. He blinked as flashes of light came from every direction. Looking around, he saw news journalists pointing cameras at him. Among the crowd, he saw Naomasa Tsukachi, squeezing his way through the crowd. The police detective's eyes widened at the sight of his friend's lifeless body. There was a lone tear that exited the detective's eye as he removed his fedora and placed it on his chest with his head lowering. While that was happening, Izuku turned towards a camera and noticed a red light on it. Holding All Might closer to him, he glared at the camera, unintentionally making the person holding it flinch. Knowing he was watching, he gritted his teeth and spoke up. Tamura Shigaraki, you're next. End of flashback. As the memory ended, he looked down at his hands and clenched them. Despite the feeling of anger he had been experiencing not only for All for One, but also himself, he couldn't change the fact that All Might is gone. Even with all the strong quirks in his arsenal. Even with the enhanced healing factor and literally centuries worth of experience that he has. It was still not enough. He was still not enough. He failed to save someone. He failed as a hero. After the events in Kamino, he made it his goal to avoid any confrontation with his classmates, especially Melissa. He couldn't bear to look at her eyes without breaking down in tears. He couldn't look at them as he felt that he was useless. With him brutally and inhumanely killing All for One on live television, he wouldn't be surprised if he was treated as a villain, a murderer, and a monster. He knew that it was all his fault, and with it all started back in the camp. He experienced and confirmed it the time when Mandalay slapped him after he had visited Ragdoll in the hospital and told him to leave. She then blamed him for Ragdoll's quirk getting stolen. He didn't argue with her nor defend himself, he just whispered an apology and left the hospital. She was right anyway. It was all his fault. His self-loathing was interrupted when a pair of hands wrapped around his waist. That's when a familiar warmth enveloped him. Arumi? He asked as he could feel her nodding from behind. Izuku. He heard her whisper in his ear with her hold on him tightening. It's okay. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel pain, she said as she released him from her hug and made him turn around. Izuku's head was lowered with the hood of his hero costume covering it. Her hands reached out for his hood and pulled it down. Just for now, don't be a hero. Don't be Blackwatch. Be yourself, be Izuku Midoriya, she said as she wiped a tear that had leaked out his eyes. For the first time since he had gotten his quirk, Izuku Midoriya was vulnerable as he collapsed into her arms and cried. I failed to save All Might, he whispered as he held onto her, as if his life depended on it. I couldn't. His words were drowned out as the rain fell down at the duo, with the rabbit hero not caring if she were to become drenched in rain. It was uncharacteristic for her usually brash and overzealous attitude and being awkward when it came to comforting civilians, but a person close and important to her was distraught, and as a hero, she couldn't let that go. She hugged him tightly and patted his head and caressed his hair, whispering words of comfort and promising that everything will be all right. In the distance, Aizawa can be seen under an umbrella. He watched as Mirko comforted his student. It was him who had called the rabbit hero to comfort Midoriya. Since the young hero had been avoiding everyone, even his own mother and Eri after All Might's death. Add in the fact that Mandalay, due to the mental stress and with Ragdoll getting her quirk stolen, had blamed Izuku for it. Something that Aizawa had scolded the heroine for. The heroine saw her mistake and tried reaching out to Izuku to apologize, but the problem child had distanced himself to those around him. Being the person to vouch for him and is the reason that the 1A class president became the youngest hero, Aizawa thought that she would be a logical choice to help reach out to his student. Plus the fact that she was the one that reached out to him despite her not believing in teaming up. And by the looks of it, he made the right decision. One last look at the rain-drenched duo, Aizawa began walking away towards a nearby parked car. Entering it, he sat in the driver's seat. As soon as he had his seat belt on, he spoke up. So what do you think we should do next? He asked. On the back seat, Niza could be seen sitting with a cup of tea and a coaster on each hand as the principal took a sip. For now, nothing. Not until young Izuku is feeling better, the rodent man said. If he is willing for a talk, we will inform him of an offer that the Commission has sent us due to the alarming rise of villain attacks around Japan after the loss of All Might. Aizawa hummed. I still don't trust the Commission or whatever they want with Midoriya, he said as he started the car, remembering back when he was still in middle school that a member of the Commissions tried to offer him for hero training due to his quirk, but luckily he declined. He had a gut feeling that accepting that offer would have been a bad call. I do too at first, Niza said, remembering a faint memory of his being experimented on as a child by one of the members in the Commission before outsmarting his captors to release him. But remembering that there was a new president calling the shots, he was leaning towards hearing them out. After a brief silence, they drove back to UA High. There was still paperwork to be done regarding Izuku's status as a student and a hero. The latter will only be figured out after hearing what the Commission is offering. For now, they hope for Izuku's fast mental and emotional recovery. A few moments after Izuku left. Within the four corners of a hospital room in Fujitani Hospital, big round yellow eyes groggily opened and flinched at the light installed on the white ceiling. Slowly as the eyes got used to the bright light, the person on the hospital bed turned their head to look at their surroundings. Tomoko Shiritoko, also known as Ragdoll, realized that she was in a hospital judging by the obnoxious sounds of her heart monitor as she slowly sat up, careful to not detach the four catheter from her hand. She sat there in silence as she remembered how she got here. A day after her abduction from the camp. She faintly remembers hearing a villain chuckling darkly as they extract her quirk out of her body. She faintly remembers Tiger being there to save her from the villains before an explosion knocked them to the ground and caused her to faint again. Sighing, she leaned on her hospital bed's headboard. She was quirkless. No search, no quirk. Her hero days are over, all thanks to that villain and the League of Villains. Instead of feeling saddened, she was oddly calm about it. Sure, her quirk was stolen from her, and as well as her role as a tracker in the wild Hussycats. But she had saved a lot of people and even prevented further injuries to those she saved. She had done so much as a hero, and she wouldn't mind just staying on the sidelines as her best friends take the wheel from now on. Her stomach growling snapped her out of her reverie. She was about to press a button beside her bed, when her head suddenly showed most of the occupants in the building, may it be a patient or the hospital staff. It's almost as if she had her quirk back. That thought made her pause. No way her quirk was stolen. That's impossible, she trailed off as something on her bedside table caught her eye. It was a green piece of paper stuck under a flower vase. Curious, she reached for it. Taking it from under the vase, she unfolded it and read its contents. As she did, her eyes widened as tears began welling in her eyes. Not noticing her other teammates enter her room, she sobbed. Her teammates approached her, Pixie Bob immediately hugging her to comfort her with Tiger patting Ragdoll on the head. It was Mandalay who noticed the paper on the green-haired woman's hand. Curious about what was written on it, she took it from Tomoko's hand and read it. Same as Tomoko, her eyes widened as she read it. Ragdoll. How are you? I hope you are feeling okay now. I apologize for the unfortunate things that had happened to you a few days ago. I admit that it was my fault that you got kidnapped by the League of Villains, and I am very sorry that your quirk got stolen. I know that you are in so much pain right now, and it's all because of me. I would understand if you or the rest of the WWPC would not want to talk to me anymore, and I won't blame you. It was my fault after all. I will pray for your speedy recovery. Sincerely, Izuku Midoriya. P.S. I hope that with the gift I gave you, you will continue to be the hero that you are and will always be. Finale. I was made for this. Green eyes looking down the polished bluestone floor is what the UA staff witnessed as Izuku Midoriya entered the conference room. They could see the nervousness and guilt in the young man's eyes. They could sympathize with him. They also feel the pressure of losing All Might, a co-worker and also a friend to some of them. But they have no time to mourn as they have much to discuss. Young Izuku, I am glad that you are able to join us today. Have a seat, Niza said, as he ushered Izuku to sit down on a vacant chair. Izuku didn't make any move nor looked over at the chair being offered to him as he looked up straight towards the chimera, who he saw was pouring tea on an empty teacup. Observing the slight shaking in the principal's hand as he poured his drink, Izuku could tell that the man/rat was feeling nervous. It was subtle but still noticeable if you really focused on it. As he looked up to the principal, he noticed two other figures by him. Beside him was a middle-aged woman with a stoic expression wearing a black suit jacket and dress, along with a purple shirt and necklace. She has slicked back ash blonde hair and a set of turquoise eyes. Behind the woman was a lanky middle-aged man with beige, chin-length, messy hair. Izuku could see that the man was wearing a black formal suit and white undershirt and black loose tie. The man's eyes have noticeable eye bags akin to those of Aizawa's. Seeing Izuku noticing the other two, Niza spoke up, catching the young man's attention. This is the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission. She is here to join us as we talk about your future not only as a hero, but also your status here as a hero course student. We would also like to talk about the aftermath of the Kamino incident, the president said. The Blacklight user flinched at the mention of that, and made him lower his head. His quirk-enhanced anxiety began to torment his mind. The woman also looked at Izuku with a look as if she was studying him, maybe even judging him. Which didn't help. So this is it, huh? The end of my hero career? They're going to arrest me now, huh? Why am I surprised? I just killed, no slaughter someone in live television for the entirety of Japan to see. Seeing the distress in the young man's face, the president spoke up once more. There is no need to worry about it, Izuku Midoriya. Despite the graphic elimination of All for One, I can assure you that you did the right thing. Even if it is fueled with vengeance and intense emotion, the woman stated. That caused confusion on Izuku's part. What? He said unintelligently. Niza chuckled at his reaction. I believe that what Madam President is talking about is that your actions during the Kamino Ward raid will not affect your early induction as a hero. Since your actions are seen as an impulse to eliminate the threat before he goes on a widespread killing spree, he said before adding. That and Endeavor took the fall for you. Izuku blinked at that. He was about to ask what that even means, when another voice spoke up. Turns out, Endeavor took the blame for planning the raid and publicly said that it was him who gave you orders to kill All for One after the villain killed All Might. There was venom in the man's voice when he mentioned All for One. Looking over at the owner of the voice, he saw Naomasa Tsukachi sitting beside Aizawa. The police detective gave him a reassuring smile. Why would he take the blame? Izuku asked. Disbelief can be heard in his voice. It was me who planned the raid. Why would he? He was cut off when Sakachi spoke up again. I believe he did it to protect your name, he said, causing Izuku to look at him with a confused look. From what I gathered, Mr. Number 2, despite his temperance and intimidating stature, he respects you in some shape or form and sees potential in you. Blinking in surprise, Izuku was flabbergasted. Who would have thought that the man he had butt heads with during the sports festival was the one saving his ass during this time? There was a cough that made Izuku look straight to the front. Now that that's out of the way, let us begin with the original point of this meeting, the man behind the president said. Madam President nodded and looked at Izuku with a serious expression. I will cut to the chase, Izuku Midoriya, the woman started. After All Might's untimely demise, crime and villainy had increased rapidly. The man behind the president began tapping something on his tablet as a hologram appeared in the center of the room. Within the hologram, Izuku could see screens of villain attacks all around the country. As you can see, villain attacks had amped up to 10 as in their words, the biggest threat is now gone. Naomasa spoke up. The police had also been deeply affected as attacks on our ranks had become frequent. The destruction and chaos happening throughout Japan. It shocked him how quick All Might's death had caused villains to grow bold and fearless. All of this just happened in such a short time period. Not to mention the Meta Liberation Army beginning to make their presence known. Aizawa spoke up as the hologram shifted to show a group of villains. The one that caught Izuku's attention is a man with a long, pointy nose. From the presence the man gives, he could tell that the man was the group's leader. If he had a nickel for every time he saw a villain leader with a pointed feature, he'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Before he could say anything, Niza spoke up. With the loss of the symbol of peace, villains are wreaking havoc, he said. Japan is in desperate need of another symbol. He paused to take a sip of his tea before looking back at Izuku. And I believe that symbol needs to be you, the rodent said, causing Izuku's eyes to widen. Madam President continued. Yes, I believe so as well. Even though I do not condone overly violent approaches in stopping villains nor using such a young man as you for this type of missions, but we are desperate to stop these villains from destroying the country entirely. Izuku watched her sigh before continuing. But this is the only way, seeing how you dealt with All for One, she said as she looked him in the eye. Izuku Midoriya, as the president of the Hero Public Safety Commission, I wish that you are to graduate early here in UA and be sent to the field to stop the villains from further terrorizing our country in any way you see fit. Feeling the atmosphere thicken, Izuku took steady breaths as he looked away. See, can I think about it? He asked in a whisper, loud enough for the people in the room to hear. Nizu and the president looked at each other before back at the green-haired lad and nodded simultaneously. Okay then, we'll have a 15-minute break. I hope that is enough time for you to give us your answer? The bear dog rat man said. He nodded. Excuse me then, Izuku whispered as he turned around and walked out of the door. As soon as the door closed, there was an awkward silence that sliced through the room. The tension was imminent as Niza sighed. Is it really wise for us to do this at a time like this? Young Izuku had not fully recovered from witnessing All Might's death. Is it a right thing to give him this much pressure in such a short notice? The Chimera asked, his voice ringing with concern. It was the president's turn to sigh. Like I said earlier, I am not fond of using such a young lad for this mission, similar to how my predecessor had failed Lady Nagant, but it is inevitable. You saw how maniacal some of the villains are in the clips that I showed you. He paused to look at the cup of tea she was given. I don't want that to continue and have more innocent lives taken. We are in need of a new symbol. She paused as she looked up. And it doesn't matter if it is for peace or fear. The moment Izuku exited the door of the conference room, he released a breath that he didn't know he was holding. Feeling the tension being washed out of his system, he decided to go for a walk. Placing his hands in his pockets, Izuku began walking through the empty hallways of the usually crowded building. Makes sense since it was a weekend. Walking aimlessly through the hallway, he thought back on the discussion back in the conference room. That discussion gave him a lot of questions to think about. Like, why would Endeavor take the bullet for him? How severe is the damage the villains have done to Japan? Should he accept the mission? Could he even pull it off? What happens if he declines? Would the villains be stopped? What would All Might think about this situation? He was unsure. Izuku Midoriya, the so-called master manipulator and strategist of Class 1A, was unsure what to do next. What to do, he trailed off as he took a left turn. As he did so, he bumped into someone, causing both of them to fall to the floor. Izuku quickly said sorry, in reflex as he quickly stood up. As he looked over at the person he collided with, his eyes widened as he saw 13 without her hero costume. Around her was scattered on the floor. Quickly helping the rescue hero up, he bowed down to pick up the paper scattered on the floor as he apologized to her repeatedly. The space-themed heroine just waved off his apology. He then offered to help her with carrying the documents to the teacher's lounge, despite the heroine's initial refusal. They quietly walked towards their destination. Reaching the teacher's lounge, Izuku placed the documents on her table as she thanked him for helping out. They talked for a while until 13 noticed the distress in Izuku's eyes. Midoriya. Are you okay? Is something wrong? She asked. The greenette looked at her with a forced smile. Yeah, I'm okay. Just unsure, he said as he gave her a tidbit of the discussion that was made in the conference room. As Izuku spoke, 13 just listened. She knows that Izuku needs to let go of the pressure that he was feeling, and she thought that talking to someone might help. And besides, she kinda knew about this topic from this morning when Niza briefed them of what's to come when the president of HPSC arrived at UA. What should I do? Izuku said, trailing off as he looked down on his feet. What would All Might do? I think, she started, making Izuku turn her way. I think he should stop thinking like All Might and what he would do in your situation, and start thinking like what Izuku Midoriya would want to do, she said. She could see Izuku's eyes widen, but he didn't say anything. Taking that as a sign to continue, she continued. Back in the USJ, I heard that you helped your classmates escape the flood zone by encouraging them to make use of their quirks. It was you back there who thought of the plan to get out because that's what you do best. You have a strong, creative mind, Midoriya. I understand that you still feel guilty about All Might's death, and I respect that, she said as she placed a hand on his shoulder. But instead of blaming and doubting yourself, you should believe in yourself. On who you truly are, she said as she stood up. That way, you will find out what kind of hero you truly wish to become, she said as she walked towards the door. But before she could leave, she looked back at him and smiled. But whatever your decision is, remember that we all will be behind you, supporting you. And with that, the space hero had left the teacher's lounge as Izuku was left with his thoughts. Who you truly are, he thought as he looked down his hand as his quirk began to sprout from his palms. I'm you and you're me. He remembers Alex say back at the first time he met his past self. He is Izuku Midoriya, he is also Alex Mercer, or rather the reincarnation. But still, he is Izuku Midoriya as well as Alex Mercer. The prototype. Zeus. Blackwatch. Mercer. He is a killer, a monster, and most importantly, he is a hero. Standing up from his seat, he began walking to the door and made his way back to the conference room. He had decided on what he would do. On what he should do. For his mom. For Eri. For his classmates. For his teachers. For All Might. For Alex Mercer. And most importantly, for himself. Entering the conference room, his arrival was quickly noticed by the people inside, but they noticed an obvious change in his demeanor. One of determination and confidence. Before they could ask him of his decision, he spoke up. I, Izuku Midoriya, Mercer, formerly known as the adaptive hero, Blackwatch, accept the assignment for the peace of Japan, he said, as he used disguise to shift to his hero costume. He then continued, but I believe that I can't do this alone. If I may, I would like to recruit some allies for help. Madam President's eyebrow was raised as Izuku said that. Curious, she asked. Who do you have in mind? Her question was met with a smirk from the young man. Looking up at the full moon, Izuku, who was on the rooftop of the 1A dorm, closed his eyes with a sense of calm as his hood fell to the cool breeze of the night. It had been a week since the meeting and his allies had been contacted to aid him in his mission to stop villains from destroying Japan. Even with his strength and power, it would be impossible for him to stop every villain on his own without causing another pandemic, as he had done so in the past, twice. Opening his eyes, he smiled. "So you came, huh?" he said as he turned to look behind him. "Sorry for such a short notice. I just want to talk before I leave for tonight." Tonight was the team's first patrol and villain hunt. The person gave him a smile. "No need to apologize." He could see the sadness in the person's eyes as they looked down. "So tonight's your first night out, huh?" He nodded. "Yeah. I'm here to say goodbye," he said as he looked up once again. "Couldn't you just say that in front of everyone else?" they asked. That caused Izuku to look down before sighing. I still can't," he said. "I still can't face her." The person in front of him held his hand and gently squeezed it. "I understand," they said. "But you should really talk to her when you're ready, she really needs you." Nodding, he smiled softly. I know, he said as he looked them in the eyes as his smile widened. "By the way, about the kiss back in the camp," he said, immediately causing the person to blush like a tomato. What about it?" Izuku chuckled at her, and used his fingers to tilt their chin up as he leaned forward for a kiss. As soon as their lips touched, they both melted into it as they held onto each other like lifelines. With passion and love, they feel themselves heating up, and that is dangerous. Not wanting to go too far, Izuku gave her one last kiss before leaning back. Their faces flushed as the moonlight shone in their eyes. Izuku gave her a tight embrace and took a step backwards. "Take care of Mom and Eri for me, okay?" he said, earning a nod from her. "I'll see you again soon," he said as he jumped off the rooftop and used his glide to fall down quickly. "Goodbye for now, Kyoka." Landing on a roll, Izuku walked towards the gate. The moment he exits that gate, his fate will forever change. Taking one last look at Yue, he smiled. "I'll be back, Yue. I promise," he thought as he ran out of the gates to meet his new life as an underground hero. A month after All Might's death. The streets that were once known for the bustling sounds of people chattering and traffic noise, now littered with broken shards of glass, chunks of debris, and villains causing havoc. The death of the symbol of peace had caused a massive shift in the heroes' society. Without All Might's inspiring presence, the public began to doubt the heroes for their safety and well-being. This in turn caused the villain count to rise tenfold throughout Japan. It was overwhelming, even for the high-ranking heroes. After All Might death, there was no more symbol of peace, no more hope. Only left is chaos and pain. As the villains continued to cause destruction in the streets, in a very familiar rooftop, a hooded figure could be seen crouching in the edge of said building. Their eyes focused and observed the chaos ensuing in the streets below. Like a twist of fate, Izuku Midoriya found himself on top of the very rooftop where his journey had started. It was the same rooftop where he had asked All Might the question, "Can a quirkless person be a hero like you?" The same rooftop where All Might had rejected his dream. The very rooftop he jumped off of. The fall that caused him to meet his past self, Alex Mercer, and gain the power of the virus now turned quirk. How poetic for him to return to the very place that made his growth as a person and as a hero possible. He couldn't help but smile, despite the chaos occurring in his surroundings. His smile suddenly turned serious as he felt a presence arrive a few feet away from him. Without turning, Izuku spoke up. "What's your status report?" he said to the newly arrived figure. "Tamura Shigaraki, inheriting All for One through Kyudai Garaki's experimentation, has been a success and is now in the state of recovery. Gigantomachia has been located in the mountain ranges near the location of Jaku General Hospital, the same hospital that Shigaraki is located in," the figure said without hesitation and paused for a bit before continuing. "The Meta Liberation Army had made itself known in parts of the country." Izuku hummed at the information given to him. "I see," he started to slowly stand up. "Are there any MLA members nearby?" he asked. "Yes, there are a small group of them near Dagoba Beach Municipal Park." The young man hummed at this and nodded. "Interesting. Thank you for the heads up," he said. The other man nodded. It is nothing, Izuku Midoriya. I am only doing what needs to be done to help you stop this ongoing chaos within the country, he said. Besides, it is the least I can do for you to help me. For now, I will be taking my leave. We don't want any of the other members of the League to notice our rendezvous, the man said. Good luck to you, Izuku Midoriya. Izuku felt the man's presence leave as he smiled. Thank you, Oboro, he said as he looked back down at the villains terrorizing the streets. My name is Izuku Midoriya. I'm the reason for all of this. Memories of All Might's death entered his mind as he clenched his fists, unconsciously channeling his quirk. They call me a killer, a murderer, and a monster. He looked down at the villains, who were still oblivious to his presence and the killing intent that he was radiating. He watched as the villains used their quirks and destroyed everything in their wake. Their laughter and yells echoed as their quirks fired through an abandoned store and shattered its glass window. I'm all of these things. A couple of footsteps came from a few feet behind Izuku, almost the same spot where Oboro had been. They think they're in control? They have no idea what I am capable of. Hey, Mercer. Are you ready for this? A female voice spoke up, causing Izuku to turn in their direction. There he saw his companions standing there. Some of them leaned on the nearby wall, while some smirked at him. He looked at them one by one. Kaizo Makaguro, Kendo Rappa, Rumi Yusujiyama, Kana Tsutsumi, all looking at him and waiting for his orders. He looked back at the villain below and raised his hood over his head. He turned back to his companion and gave them a determined yet intimidating look. I am Izuku Midoriya. I am Mercer. I am a killer, a murderer, a monster. I may not be the symbol this society wants, but I am the symbol it hopelessly needs. I am the symbol of fear. And right now, I was made for this, he said, green eyes turning blood red as he jumped down the building, his quirk manifesting as he let gravity pull him down. Bonus chapter? Izuku Midoriya was so confused. Well, that is a massive understatement. He was sure he was jumping from rooftop to rooftop before a flash of light forced him to cover his eyes. But after blinking, he was suddenly here in USJ, face to face with Noma once more. His confusion grew when two figures landed on each side of him. Turning to the figures, his eyes widened when he saw himself. Albeit in different clothes and hair color, with equal confusion and shock. He also noticed another of himself, standing alongside his classmates, but was wearing their gym uniform instead of a hero costume. Only one thing came into his mind when he realized there were 4 Izukus in the place. What the foo?
Let me know in the comments below if you guys want the next part. Also check out my other video that has been shown and left. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share this video. And have a fantastic day. Bye.